This took place when I was 14 years old, camping in a little area of land in western Maryland where lots of my mom's family had little cabins. This was in the middle of nowhere, on private property, and everyone on the mountain was related to us one way or another. We grew up spending the summers around the campfire, telling scary stories and running around with all of my cousins. Quick explanation of layout. Imagine a large capital T for a road. Above the T, by 150 feet, ran Savage River. If you went left on the T, it would take you past multiple family house, but also dense forest that cut off the road. If you went all the way to the right of the T, was my mom's tiny cabin, where we stayed. I often went off on my own, preferring it that way. I was about to do just that when my aunt had asked me to tag along. She's 14 years older than I am, and a big kid. She had pink in her hair at the time, covered in tattoos, and is almost 6 feet tall. So, not easily intimidated. So I had decided that we'd go all the way to the left, into the dense forest, and she's fine with that, admitting that she had come with me so she could smoke a joint and keep out of eyesight of my disapproving grandmother. Now, I was a good kid. Even though she offered me a hit, the thought of drugs still scared me, so I declined. From the end of the road was a super rough dirt path into the woods, with the river still running 150 feet above the path. If you were to walk towards the river, it goes on a downward slope. A few miles in, you'll actually come across one of those legendary random staircases that led to nowhere. On this particular day, I had taken the dirt path and had walked down the 150 feet along the river, watching the fish and crawdads scurry as my aunt got high as a kite, a little bit behind me. I was in my own little world when I suddenly heard a click noise that brought me back to reality. I look up and around, confused. Then my eyes land on some man that I've never seen before, standing across the river from me, no more than 15 feet from me. He must have just walked out of the woods on the other side of the river. It's summer, but he's in a black jacket and raggedy jeans and is holding one of those old cheap non-digital yellow cameras that you would roll the top and click it to be able to take another picture. I was stunned because I had never seen anyone other than my family anywhere around the area in all the years that I'd been going up there. He smiled at me slightly, lowering his camera. He was older, probably 40s, and very scruffy, tall and kind of thin. He takes a step forward, and I turn to take a step back. He scrolls the top of the camera and points it directly at me again. I am literally at the loss of words and can only manage to take another step back, almost slipping on a rock as I do. That's when my aunt stumbles through the trees and is in mid-sentence about how much she missed being high when she stopped and stared at the man. I was just staring at her, at this point, frozen like a deer in the headlights. I slowly turn, and he's not looking at my aunt. He's staring right at me. He clicks the camera again at us, and then he does something that makes my blood run cold and turns the situation from weird to terrifying. He does the tut-tut-tut thing with his finger and points to what looks like a knife sheathed and strapped to his hip, and then points a finger that he slices across his throat. That's the moment that I went into autopilot. I spun around and began barreling through the trees, grabbing onto my aunt. My heart pounded as I ran, though I could have sworn I heard one more click before I could hear the splashing from behind me. I almost collapsed because my legs felt like jelly. The river is really deep in parts, but where I had been, we're at a point where the water would have been only thigh deep to a grown man. I tore upwards and ran blindly, like a rabbit from a fox. When we saw the stairs, my aunt quickly yanked me to the other side and slid down beside me as we caught our breath. I was wheezing so loud, I had to cover my mouth to try and muffle the sound. I peer around, but the trees are so dense, I can't see the river from the stairs. But even with my hammering heartbeat, I hear the snapping of branches, like someone barreling through the forest. Now, I am very, very scared. It's not an easy straight trail back into my family property. You have to weave around, and in spots, it dips and gets rocky, so you have to do like an S shape to get through. There's random rocks everywhere, and it would be so easy to twist an ankle or to smack into a tree in my panic. Not to mention, we would always tread careful and look where we were going because there are so many snakes in that area. I'm sobbing and wheezing badly, and we had another few miles until we'd even hit the first part of my family's property. My mind is racing, but I know we can't stay. Neither of us had any type of weapon, and staying here was making it harder for me to convince myself to run as paralyzing terror crept in. My legs and arms already cut up, and before I can decide what to do, my aunt pulls me towards the T road, desperately, just stumbling and running. I don't make it more than another mile until I misstep and trip over a branch, tripping and smacking headfirst into a tree. I crumple over, taste blood. I had bit through my lip in the fall. I am dazed, but my adrenaline is still pumping, so I scramble to a T as my aunt turns and notices that I'm not right behind her. She scrambles back and drops to her knees in front of me, whispering. I'm dazed, but she keeps repeating that we need to keep going. I'm shaking so bad, I don't think I could walk, much less run. I have probably another mile and a half until I'm on my family's property, but another 2 until we're at an occupied cabin, my grandmother's. My ears are ringing, and I'm hardly paying attention to my aunt's frantic pleas. I completely psych myself out again and keep looking behind me, but I don't see anything. She decides that she's not going to waste any more time because of stupid me, and half drags me up and forward. I hobble forward as quick as I can as she continues to pull me too quickly. The rest is a blur until we break through the trees. Most of my family wasn't there at the time, so we only stop when we make it to my grandmother's, and I just run in, sobbing. No one locks the doors around there, and my grandmother takes one horrified look at me and my aunt, who is equally cut up and scared looking, and yells for my grandfather, who promptly takes over and grabs his rifle. I can't put into sentences what just happened, so my aunt takes over, leaving out the part about her being as high as a kite. He and my grandmother go to cabin, gathering the men and their guns, as well as warning the women and children about what just occurred. There's no signal up there, so calling the sheriff wasn't an option, and to get up to the mountain, if they left immediately, would take over an hour. It's getting dark. The roads leading up to the property are so windy and steep, you'd have to be out of your mind to try and drive up them in the dark. My mother eventually got word and came over. She took one look at my aunt and said that I had probably just gotten high with her, which in turn made us overly paranoid, and when we saw the random fisherman who was trespassing, we jumped to conclusions and had probably startled him as much as he had startled us. She continued by saying that I probably just imagined he was taking my picture, or that he began chasing us, though my aunt had been the one to repeatedly retell the story. My aunt stood up and yelled at my mother, saying that I was a good kid and didn't do anything, and that we were telling the truth. They began screaming at each other, and my grandmother made them both stop, telling them both to grow up. Even with the men of my family scouring the woods, they never saw any sign of the man we had encountered earlier. Everyone on the mountain locked their doors that night, though, for the first time in a long time. And to this day, all I can wonder is if I'm part of some creepy picture collection. But considering what could have happened, maybe if I had been alone like normal, I can live with that. Because my parents had separated before I was born, I spent my time growing up between each of their houses. Each summer, until I turned 19, I stayed with my father in rural Missouri. He had grown up in the area himself, and most of his family still lived there. Without much to do, like going to the movies and stuff, I would fill my days hanging out with my older cousin and getting into mischief. Many of our long summer days were taken in wandering the surrounding woods. On one of these journeys, we came across a big lake sitting quietly by itself, out in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods. The water was crystal clear and filled with tons of monstrous fish. We asked the adults if they were aware of its existence, but none have heard of it. That was probably the reason for it having so many large fish. No one living in the area had fished it, and anyone who had in the past allowed its location to be lost. We would fish the pond 3 or 4 times, coming away with a stringer full of lunkers on each occasion. On the 5th occasion, we hoped to accumulate enough for a big family fish fry. The summer holiday was starting to wind down, and we figured a fish fry would be a great way to cap it off. It was a warm Saturday morning when we headed out. We started about an hour before sunup, because the walk-in took well over an hour. Besides, the fish stopped biting by the hottest part of the day, and we hoped to get back to my dad's house by early afternoon. The beautiful sight of the pond came into view around dawn. It didn't take long for us to get our first bites, and for the next 3 hours, the fish came quickly, one after another. Our limit was caught by 10:45, and I was rearing to get going. We had a 90-minute walk back with 2 5-gallon buckets packed to the top with fish, so I imagined another 30 could be added to that. To my displeasure, my cousin thought it would be refreshing to take a dip in the lake before we left. He tried to pressure me into joining him, but I didn't know how to swim at the time. I just wanted to get back, but he was older than me, so he was in charge. I plopped my tail onto a rock and waited while he did his thing. There was an old rope tied to a tree, probably from 100 years ago, and he wanted to swing from it. It looked unsafe to me. However, my concerns were laughed off as he stripped down to his boxers, setting his clothes on the ground next to me. He climbed the tree a little ways and grabbed the rope. Pushing off, he swung out just a short distance before the rope snapped right above him. He'd made it out far enough to hit the deep water, but probably not as far as he intended. When he hit the water, his body made a dull thud sound. It certainly didn't sound normal, and likely hurt. I was planning on laughing at him, saying I told you so, but as the seconds passed, he never surfaced. The situation was quickly becoming scary. I looked around to see if he came up somewhere further away, perhaps floating unconscious because of the hard contact with the water, but still nothing. I was beginning to panic and waded out as far as I dare, looking into the water for him. Unfortunately, the water became cloudy with every step I took and made it impossible to see. Soon, it was clear to me that he had drowned. How? I had no idea. Perhaps if I could have swam back then, I may have been able to help him, but it was too late now. I was helpless to do anything more than pack up and head home. On the entire walk back, a small nugget of hope lingered in the back of my mind that he had tricked me and would pop up at some point. This didn't happen, however, and the dread I carried of telling my family grew with each step. I tried several times to find the words, but with each attempt, I would break down and choke on my tears. Ultimately, I could only manage, "Mark drowned." They got the point after that, and once I was able to pull myself together, I led my dad and uncle back out to the pond. Mark's body was still nowhere to be found. With no other options, we went into the sheriff's office to report the drowning. When I realized where we were headed, I started freaking out. In my young mind, I thought I was going to get in trouble or be blamed for my cousin's death. It took a few minutes, but they were able to convince me that I wasn't in trouble. Even after they had, I couldn't help but feel guilty every time I looked at my uncle, regardless of what he claimed. I couldn't believe he didn't blame me, even if it was just a small amount. I explained what happened to the sheriff, and the search began the next morning. Just by chance, that was the day I was going back to my mother's. That Monday night, my mom sat me down to tell me that a team of divers had found Mark's body earlier that day. When they discovered him, one of his feet were hung up on a sunken log, so they assumed that was why he never surfaced. I wish I could say this made me feel better, but it did not. It did, however, serve as a catalyst to learn how to swim. The guilt of not being able to help my cousin stayed with me for most of my life, and I never wanted to be in the position of not being able to help another person ever again. So in a twisted kind of way, his death had a positive impact on my life. However, if I had the choice, I'd prefer he still be with us.